Hello, fourth and seventh period. If you did not listen to March 20th, Friday, March 20th, I need you to go back and listen to that first because I had a really, really hard time getting that to post, and it took me several days because it was, I don't know, something was wrong. So, anyways, I just posted that a couple days ago. So, if you haven't heard that yet, go back and listen to that before you listen to me right now. Okay, we left off with Molly and Kip and Hester. They escaped from the night gardener. It was like he could only go so far, and they went over the bridge and left the house. So, chapter 40 is called The Last Story. They rode for what felt like hours. The sky above was limpid and black. It shone with pinprick stars that did little to light their path. Molly sat beside Hester, holding her hand. The old woman's fingers were stiff and sticky with blood. She hardly moved, only sitting up occasionally to release a rattling cough. "You're all right," Molly whispered, stroking her hair. "You'll be all right." Hester swallowed. "I know enough to know that's not true." She smiled and then coughed again. Molly wiped fresh blood from the edges of her mouth. She tried not to let the old woman see the worry on her face. A bloody cough meant she was bleeding on the inside. The wagon rounded a narrow bend, turning away from the river and toward the village. "Stop the cart," Hester murmured, raising her hand. "We're taking you to the village," Molly said. "We'll find you a warm bed and hot meal and—" Hester coughed. "You'll be hauling a corpse by the time you get there," she said. "This'll do." Molly rapped against the side of the wagon. "Pull over," she called. Kip nodded and steered to the side of the path. Molly watched as he grabbed his crutch and slid down from the bench, his face a picture of stony resolve. In the faint moonlight, he almost looked like Dad. Molly wondered when he had become so grown up. She gently lowered herself off the wagon. Her whole body was sore and bruised. It hurt to stand. She looked at the woods around her. They were in a small clearing where the path broke into three parts. "The crossroads," she said. "It's here we first met you." Hester propped herself up on one elbow, peering around. So it is. Even now, even in pain, she had a coy glint in her eye. Molly and Kip helped the old woman off the back of the wagon. She was still wearing her pack of junk. It dangled from her shoulders, a mess of splinters and shards. In the moonlight, it was hard to tell where the pack ended and Hester's body began. "I'll find some firewood," Kip said. "There'll be plenty of time for that after, dearie." Hester grimaced, doubling over in pain. "Help me get this thing off," she said. Molly and Kip gingerly removed the pack from her shoulders and set it on the ground. Without it, the woman looked absurdly small. Hester stared at the pile of wreckage and gave a wry chuckle. "No need to search for firewood. You got all you need right here." She pulled her briar pipe from her pack. The stem dangled from the bowl, snapped off but for a few fibers. "So much for old friends." She tossed the pipe back into the pile. Hester nodded at a rotting stump and limped toward it. Molly rushed to her side and helped her sit. "Thank you, love," she groaned, gripping Molly's hand tight. Molly knew she should have been angry at Hester, should have yelled at her for ruining their trap. But right now, she only wanted the old woman to live. She brushed a strand of silver hair from her wrinkled brow. "Where does it hurt?" "Where don't it hurt? That's the fairer question," Hester chuckled, and her chuckle turned to pain. She hunched over, her eyes clenched tight. Molly watched her coughing and felt a swell of nausea. "This is all my fault," she said. "If that net hadn't been there—" "Hush you," the old woman waved her off. "It wasn't any net or fall or even phantom night gardener. It was curiosity that killed Hester Kettle, plain as that." She stared into the trees, shaking her head. "Oh, I knew it was dangerous. Why do you think I stayed away all these years? But in the end, I just had to go, had to see it with my own eyes. And I'll tell you right now, it was worth it." She gave a sort of vague smile, her eyes fixed on some invisible plane. What's a storyteller but someone who asks folks to believe in impossible things? And for one perfect moment, I saw something impossible, and that's enough for me. Kip had tied Galileo's reins to a branch and joined his sister and the old woman. "But you didn't just go there to see the tree," he said, his voice tight. "You wanted a piece of your own. You wanted a wish, same as everyone. Molly looked at him, dread rising. How do you know about wishes? Kip ignored her and turned back to Hester. So let's hear it. What was your big wish? Kip, not now, Molly said. He's fine. The old woman bobbed her head. I'm foolish, really. Do you remember all those pretty things I said about Aesop? You called him the king of storytellers, Molly said. Hester nodded her fingers together. I suppose I wanted to be the queen. She peered up at the dark sky, her eyes bright. I wanted the world to remember me for the stories I told. Molly heard this and felt a pain within, for she knew what it was to see a story vanish even as she told it. You could just write him down, she said. Make a book. A book? Hester laughed. Can you imagine it? Me hunched over a little desk, quill in hand, pulling down all those fancy scratches on paper. She shook her head. Truth is, I never learned my letters. I can write, Molly said. I can teach you. We could start right now. The old woman shook her head. Afraid there's no time for that, or much else for that matter. She groaned, pulling herself to her feet. Though there is time for one last thing. She limped to her pack. Most folks don't value a good story, and they pay accordingly. But every once in a while, something a little more special comes my way. She plunged her arm right into the heart of the pack, feeling her way past pots and bird cages and lightning rods. Here it is, she said, standing up. Been carrying this for goodness knows how long. Don't think I'll get round to it now. She handed Molly a small oilskin bundle wrapped tight with twine. Molly turned the package over in her hands. What is it? Something special. I never had much use for it, not being the settling down type. But you two? I've a feeling it might be just what you're after. Molly started to unwrap the bundle, but the woman stopped her. There'll be time aplenty to open that letter, she coughed in her fist, once I depart. Molly looked up from the gift. She knew what the woman meant by depart. You're not going to die, Hester. Her voice was shaking. You're going to live and tell stories. You're going to be the queen of stories, remember? She did not know why, but she could not bear the thought of a world without Hester Kettle in it. The old woman patted Molly's hand. That's a heavy crown for this old brow. She turned back to her pack. Well, looky here. She lifted her hurdy-gurdy from the wreckage. 2 strings were broken, and it had a giant hole in the body. She plucked one of the remaining strings, which obliged with a faint tone. Let it never be said that Hester Kettle wasn't a lucky woman. She slung her instrument over her shoulder. Much as it pains me, I'd best be moving on. Kip hopped to Molly's side. Where are you going? Hester took a deep breath, facing the black woods. It's time for old Hester to tell one more story. It's one I've been working on for a long time, maybe my whole life. Call it The Last Story. The phrase put a chill through Molly. What's it about? Apologies, love. She sounded genuinely sorry. This one's for me and me alone. That's the way it goes with last stories. Molly wanted to tell her that she could stay, but she knew the truth. There were some places you could only go alone. She blinked, her eyes burning with tears. I bet it's a real grand one. The old woman smiled kindly. It ends well enough. Molly looked at her. In the blurred moonlight, she could almost see Hester as a young girl with yellow hair and plump cheeks and scraped knees. Molly would have liked being friends with such a person. I've a feeling someday, she said, when I tell my own last story, it might have an old woman with a pack on her shoulders in it. Hester raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't that be a thing? She bowed her gray head in a half curtsy. You pups take care. She swung her instruments from her shoulder and turned the crank. A low melody filled the air, echoing through the darkness. With that, the mannequin woman turned and hobbled slowly into the trees, humming to herself a secret thing that no soul would ever hear. Molly held Kip's hand in her own. They stood together in silence, listening to Hester Kettle's song recede farther and farther into the night. And then it was gone, and the woods were silent. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. I'll see you tomorrow. I will read to you tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day.